We respectfully acknowledge the territory in which Memorial St John's campus is situated as the ancestral homelands of the Beothuk, and the island of Newfoundland as the ancestral homelands of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk. We would also like to recognise the Inuit of Nunatsiavut and Nunatuhavut and the Innu of Nitassinan and their ancestors as the original people of Labrador. We strive for respectful relationships with all of the peoples of this province as we search for collective healing and true reconciliation and honour this beautiful land together. Please also recognise the peoples and their ancestors whose ancestral homelands are those on which your own institutions are situated.
So it's very good to be here tonight. This is the first Coastlines. I want to thank everyone for coming. And I'm just kind of getting used to looking at my, my compadres and my friends here on stage. There are 5 of us here. We're all paying very careful attention to social distancing regulations. Earlier we had a kind of ruler out just to make sure we were an appropriate distance apart. I want to thank everyone for coming. I'm in very good company here. We're up at Signal Hill. And I want to thank those who are attending live and also those of you who will be watching later once this is recorded. I'm going to just do some quick introductions, let you know what you can look forward to this evening. I'm going to say a little bit about the English department and the writing program, and then we'll dive into the discussion. So I think everyone knows that we're here tonight to hear from Michael Crummey, and you're going to read to us a little bit and answer some questions, a little bit of reading, and more, I think, Q&A is what we're looking for in discussion. Yes, I'm also glad to note that you're an alumna, in fact, Department of English alum of Memorial University. Our other guests, Angela Antle, also many of you will know Angela through your work on CBC. But you're also an alum of Memorial and currently a student in the interdisciplinary PhD program. William Ping, another alum of MUN, Memorial, and also the English department, and a novelist and an author writing books we just heard. So that's great. About your grandfather who emigrated from China in, I believe, 1932. So certainly an experience that's worth telling some stories and letting us know about. And then also glad to welcome Dr. Vianne Timmins, who I'm just going to call Vianne because you're, and I was at, many people are glad, we're all glad that you're here, Vianne. And this morning we had a kind of town hall on women's issues in a time of COVID, and just that accessibility and the ways that you're engaging in conversations with all of us is great. So, and we're kind of really excited about this. Hopefully on screen, we look as relaxed as we are. We've got our Diet Cokes and our wines and our waters. So we hope you're at home with some of the same snacks and refreshments. And again, we're really glad you're here. So we will have, I'm going to make a couple comments, like I said, about the English program. Then we'll have a brief reading, some discussion, and at the end, I get the honor of announcing the next book club selection, which I think is not known yet to most people. I want to just go back to the land acknowledgement, and I really appreciate with the land acknowledgement, because what it reminds me of, and I should have said I'm the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, and what the land acknowledgement does is it draws attention to relationships. And I like to think about this as the work of the we. I think the work of the university is really about thinking about community and how we can contribute to that, to living in community. Again, this book club is a great example, especially in a time of COVID. We're all struggling. I think many of us are thinking, how is this winter going to go? It's our first winter in a pandemic. But it's really events like this, I think, that people can look forward to and connect on, whether we're in the room or at home with friends and family. So there's already 400 members, which is like record. We just started in October, so that's terrific. You can, if you go to the website, www.pbc.guru, I think it's /mun, it's aimed at alumni, but it's open to anyone who's interested. Another thing I'll say about the groups organizing tonight's event, the Faculty of Humanities and Social Sciences, the Offices of Public Engagement, and Alumni Engagement, I think one thing we're all doing is thinking about what it means to live together well. And I think for me, books, poetry, literature, that's what they help us with. And I just read your book, Michael, in the last couple of weeks, and you know, what it really did was it brought me into this moment of the lives of Ada and Everett. And I say a moment because that's just a moment in my life, but I was really there with them, and that was incredible. And I was telling someone at the charity drive at the university on Saturday that when I finished it, I was in that moment, and it just opened up this sadness in me because of their lives. And so what I was able to do was feel my emotions and my reality in a different way, I think, because I'd been in that moment with Ada and Everett. And so thank you for that. And I think that's what books can do, is they can kind of crack us open where we might need to be a little more widely cracked open. And so it's great that I'm really glad about this book club. I'm really glad that your book has started us off. The Department of English, which I think the three of you are all graduates of, has an excellent creative writing program. You can check out Breakwater Books. Best Kind and Racket are two books that have student writing. You can check those out on their website. We have a Writers in Residence program with some great authors, including Michael Crummey, Kevin Major, Wayne Johnston, Lisa Moore, Michael Winter, Jessica Grant, and Elizabeth DeMariaffi. The 2021 Writer in Residence is Sharon Bala. And finally, I know a lot of you look forward to the Sparks Literary Event, which is a really long-standing, in fact, I'll very quickly mention, I was hiking with the trail, what's the group, the Northeast Trail, the Trail Association, and the first thing they said was, I can't wait for Sparks, and that was kind of my intro to St. John's and Memorial. But we will be having that virtually in January. You can check social media and the English Department's website for information about that. And now I'm going to turn it over to you, Dr. Timmons.
Now, I'm an English grad too.
There you go.
Did you know that?
Okay.
Thank you, Jennifer, and good evening, everyone. I am so thrilled to be here for the very first Coastlines Book Club event. I'm actually so thrilled to be here because I've never been part of a book club. I always heard about book clubs. All my friends are part of book clubs. I knew they drank a lot of wine, ate a lot of snacks, like you said, but I haven't been offered any snacks here. So I will say that this is a, what would I say, a frugal book club that we're here today. But
Pandemic rules, no food.
And I'm thrilled. I'm looking for deep, and this is important for all my book club colleagues, deep, intimate, interesting, profound discussion. Whoa. Right? We can have that here. I'm doubly thrilled that Michael is our first author, because I did Tales from the Road Mun, where I traveled the province, and I'm in Woody Point. And I'm on a boat with one of our alum who's showing me his entrepreneurial, or his business, and explaining to me about it. And we pull up to this little coffee shop, and there's a film camera, and someone's standing there, and we crash it. We just go in, think we're going to get a cup of coffee, and they're filming you, right? Like, and I get to meet Michael there, and he tells me about his book, The Innocents, and I said, I'm going to buy that book. And I did buy that book. I gave it away as a gift because I didn't read it at that time. But then I found out this book club, and I was invited to it. And I got the book, and I devoured it. I'm a ferocious reader. I read everything that I can get my hands on. But I really found this impactful, and I'm not supposed to say anything about the book in my notes, but I want to tell you, I told Michael this earlier, the scene I cannot get out of my head is the baby bear cub that gets blinded. That just stays with me all the time. I don't know, I didn't like that you put that in the story. Michael, next time, don't do that. That really impacted me, because I just thought he was so lost and alone without his mother, wandering around in the woods. It was really sad. It was.
He was kind of a metaphor for the youngsters.
Yeah, see, now we're getting deep.
Yeah.
No,
That's what I like.
That's sadness. Yeah, it's in there. Yeah.
You know, I've met many authors since I've been here, and when I traveled the province, I saw that every community is so different and unique. And the book club is going to be a bit like that. It's all about Newfoundland and Labrador, but it's designed to show the diversity in Newfoundland and Labrador, literature that's going to highlight our rich history, culture, and personality of the people of this place. And I'll tell you, traveling this province, there are some unique personalities in this place. I met them in many nooks and corners, many microbreweries. I met them in many city council chambers, some really interesting people, all passionate about their province. Another thing I learned is the deep connections everyone has for Memorial, and that's especially true for our alumni, as we see how many have joined us. And Michael's an alum, Angela's an alum, William's an alum, and all going to share your stories, right? Going to do that. Absolutely. Jennifer, I want to thank the English department for the part that they played in sharing so many authors on the road to success with the creative writing program. That's fabulous. Yep. That's wonderful. Including was Angela Antle in the list. And I know, Angela, you need no introduction. But I'm going to give her one, just because I know she doesn't need it, but I want to do it. Angela writes and produces award-winning documentaries for CBC. She's directed the TV documentary Gander's Ripple Effect, How a Small Town's Kindness Opened on Broadway. I saw that. Wasn't that fabulous? Mm-hmm. Right? Recently shortlisted in the prestigious 2020 fiction contest in the Fiddlehead National Literary Magazine. Currently a PhD student at Memorial, an alumni superstar. So I'm really thrilled that you're here with us today. I'm so looking forward to the deep, profound discussion we have. So no trivia, okay? No, I want to hear about the metaphors that I missed when I was reading the book. And I hope all of you are looking forward to this discussion as much as I am. And I now have to pass things over to our host, Angela. Welcome, Angela, and I'm looking forward to your hosting.
Thank you, Vianne. Thank you, Dr. Timmons. Thank you, Dr. Simpson. Welcome, William. Welcome, Michael. It's thrilling to be here to host this very first Coastlines Book Club. And it's true, I am an alum, and I was lured back in by the magic of Lisa Moore and Sharon Bala and Robert Chafe and some of the amazing writers who teach at MUN now. And yeah, and now I'm doing a PhD, so I don't know how that happened really, but here we are. In the courses that I took, that when I got lured back in, I met some incredibly diverse and talented young and old writers. We worked on podcasts together. William's a great radio host. Short stories, novel chapters, poems, and it's such a collaborative experience. Everyone sits around the table. It's terrifying, actually, the first time. And you know, you read your stories, everyone gives feedback, but it really does make you a better writer, a stronger writer, and it develops a community. You feel like you're part of something. So I want to introduce William because he was one of the superstars that we worked with in the courses at MUN. He worked on a radio documentary with me at CBC called Chicken Balls and Bayman. And he explored the story of Chinese immigrants who came here to Newfoundland and Labrador and built restaurants across the province and how that happened and why that happened. And he's since done other pieces for CBC.ca. His work has been featured in Riddle Fence, in the forthcoming anthologies Us, Now, and Corner Stories. And he's working on this novel that he was telling us about. I think possibly the first Newfoundland novel to explore the Chinese experience. So I look forward to interviewing William here in your chair next time. And now I'm going to introduce the man of the hour, Michael Crummey. His work is, of course, a part of the foundation of our contemporary culture, the perfect writer to launch this book club on Newfoundland's literature of place. As a Central Newfoundlander, I've followed Michael's work from the very beginning, and I'm very fortunate as a reader to have read and reread his work. And I consider it one of the huge perks of my job to be able to interview the authors when they come out with their books, and to be able to be the first, usually, to have a crack at Michael's new book is always great. I've interviewed him on the stage at Writers at Woody Point, and that conversation is aired across the region on Atlantic Voice. So Michael has written 5 novels. I'm always worried about bringing up the number because you always forget one. 8 books of poetry. His gripping and unapologetic, gutting depictions of life in Outport, Newfoundland make him something of a cultural documentarian. River Thieves was his debut novel, detailed the life of Beothic settlers in the 19th century. The Wreckage was his second, the tale of young Newfoundland soldier Wish Fury and his beloved Sadie Parsons during World War II. And the book we're talking about today, The Innocents, which chronicles the existence of 2 orphan children on an isolated cove in Outport, Newfoundland in the 18th century, cut off from everyone else, fending for themselves, battling loneliness and the elements of an unforgiving landscape. A metaphor for COVID, perhaps. A finalist for the Giller Prize 2019, the Governor General's Literary Award, the Rogers Writers Trust Fiction Prize, and winner of the Thomas Riddell Atlantic Fiction Award. It was named one of the best books of 2019 by the Globe and Mail, the CBC, the Toronto Star, and Maclean's. It's important to say all those amazing accomplishments. It sounds like a list, and I'm sure it's embarrassing to hear, but congratulations.
Yeah, thanks.
It's such an important book. It's such a story, an important story to be told. I think people through the generations battled the kind of loneliness that those children experienced.
Yeah, I mean, it's a weird thing to write books, and weirder to put them out in the world then. And you never know how people are going to respond to them. And this is a story that I wasn't sure I wanted to write for a long time. In fact, I was positive I didn't want to write this story for obvious reasons. So I have to admit, surprised that it seemed to have struck such a chord with people. And you know, as a writer, I think we all deal with imposter syndrome. And I keep waiting for the book that people are going to hold up and say, see, I told you he sucks.
Yeah.
And here's the proof. So I'm glad that hasn't happened yet. But yeah, we'll see how it goes from here.
Before I ask you to do a reading, this book started with the nub of something you found in the archives at the rooms.
Yeah, and I'll try to keep this short because this can be a long introduction and I don't want it to be. But I spent a lot of time at the archives because most of what I write has some kind of historical root to it. And whenever I'm in there, even if I'm researching something specific, I just poke around just to see what else is in there.
They let you poke around in there?
Well, you know. By poke around, I mean write my little notes and hand them in and get the things back from them. I'm very careful when I poke. And there are thousands, tens of thousands of amazing little anecdotes and stories and details. And I came upon, completely unexpectedly, a little one-paragraph anecdote about a clergyman traveling around Newfoundland. So this was way back when most communities were too small or too poor to have a church, and the clergy traveled. And in the course of his travels, the clergyman happened on a brother and sister living alone in a tiny outport. And they had been orphaned, and it was obvious that this sister was pregnant. And he automatically assumed, and I'm 100% sure he was right to assume it, that the brother was the father of the child. And that was really it. There was no other details about how long they'd been there alone together, or what happened to them afterwards. And I knew as soon as I read it that there was a story in it. And my second thought, after thinking, oh, there's a story, my second thought was, I don't want to touch that with a 10-foot pole. Like, not my, that's someone else's story to tell. And I tried desperately to forget it. You know, I didn't make a note of it. I couldn't find it again if my life depended on it.
Oh, really? Oh, that's funny.
But they stayed with me because I think, and this is the reason I think they stayed with me, I always saw them through the lens of my own move out of childhood into adolescence. You know, and I grew up in Buckins, and there were resources. Not a lot, but there were resources for kids. You know,
You had a bowling alley?
We had a bowling alley. We had a sex education class in school. And when I was almost 13, Mom forced me to read a book called Almost 13. Thanks for that, Mom. And so there were places you could turn to like where there were some kind of answers to the questions that arise naturally when you go through that unbelievable, unexpected change. And it was still, despite the fact that I had places to turn to, it was still a time in my life that I think of as the most confusing and in some ways the most terrifying. and also in some ways the loneliest time of my life. Because I knew all of my friends were going through the exact same things or things like it. But no one talked about it.
All right.
You know, it was something you went through alone. And I could not imagine what it must have been like for that brother and sister. I imagined that they were orphaned before those changes started to come over them. And then they were completely alone with trying to figure out, what the hell does that mean? Who am I now, right? In some ways, my experience was almost like being taken over by a second being that was me but wasn't me. I didn't know what my relationship to that creature was. And so I imagine these two youngsters trying to muddle their way ahead without even the language. Even if they were brave enough to ask questions of each other, I imagine they wouldn't even have had the language to say what it was that was happening. So that, I think, is the reason in the end I decided to take a shot at it, to try and get down on paper what that might have been like for those two.
Before we go any further, I'd love for you to read from the book.
Yeah, sure. I
hope it's not the scene with the bear in it, because I would not be happy.
I mean, the scene with the bear, it was a very difficult scene to write, but it's something that I stole from Cartwright's journal, his Labrador journal. There's a character in this book, Captain Truss, who sort of finds his way to the cove partway through the novel. And he is based very closely on the Cartwright that comes through in that journal that Cartwright wrote about his time in Newfoundland and Labrador. And Cartwright lived to kill things. Like, he just loved shooting and killing. He seemed like a lovely guy in some ways. But, I mean, this was something that was at the heart of his life. And it was slightly different in the journal. He found a bunch of bears at a river because there were salmon in the river. And he was just killing. And he killed the mother, and this young bear came after him. And he didn't want to waste the shot that it would take to kill more adult bears. So instead of killing the cub, he just shot its eyes out and left it to its own devices.
So that was based on a true incident.
Yeah. And it just seemed to me, as I said, that I don't think I realized this before I put it in the book, but it just seemed like such a clear parallel to the experience that those children had, where they were basically orphans and they were blind to their own natures, right? And blind to what the rest of the world might be like. And they just sort of knocked around, trying to find their way as best they could. But again, I apologize.
No, don't apologize.
No more blind bears.
That it had an effect at me is a positive thing for a writer, right?
Yeah. Anyway, I'll just read, this is a really short section from, the book opens with the death of the youngster's baby sister, and then their mother, and then their father, all in one awful winter. And the baby sister becomes kind of a recurring figure in the novel because Ada speaks to the dead child as if she's present. So this is their first winter alone in the cove. In the heart of the winter, there were long hours of dark and enforced idleness, and they passed the time with made-up games that featured elaborate rules forgotten and redrawn from one day to the next. They whiled away evenings with a call and response they knew as, "There's your answer," asking the most ludicrous or inane or troubling questions they could think of in turn. Do the dead piss and shit in heaven? Why does the brook run downhill and never up? Where do the stars sleep during the day? And replying with belches or farts or some invented animal noise. "There's your answer," the respondent concluded each time, "and may it serve thee." They played a version of hide-and-seek within the cramped bounds of the tilt, the blinder covering their face as the other hid, and keeping their eyes closed as they searched the room with their reaching hands. They sang the fragments of songs remembered from their parents' days. They rearranged the materials on Ada's shelf or drew elaborate designs in the sand near the hearth. They had settled back into their shared sense of being of a piece, and there was little enough happening in the world around them to disturb the illusion. Everett still woke to the sound of Ada whispering aloud on occasion, and he finally worked up the nerve to ask who she was speaking to. "Our Martha," he said when she confessed. "She's here," Ada said. "I feels her right with us still." "Does she ever say anything back to you?" "Not in anything like words, but I hears her inside. A voice like." "No," she said, "just a feeling." You don't feel her with you?" He shook his head in the dark and lay quiet a while. It made sense to him there would be a division of aptitude and skill between them, and the envy he felt for her peculiar gifts was all admiration, devoid of pettiness. "Do you feel the same thing with Mother and Father?" "No," she said, "it's just with Martha." He was about to ask her why the difference when it came to him. "She died an innocent," he said. Ada raised a hand to her brother's face. There was a fuzz of blonde hair on his chin, and she brushed her fingers back and forth through the downy growth. "Martha sits at God's right hand," she said, "and she hears our prayers." It made Everett wonder where exactly it was their parents sat in the firmament. He thought that heaven might be like the ocean, that the dead were set adrift within it, and that nothing in that expanse sat still for long, but for their infant sister anchored at God's side. But not even Ada would venture an answer to that question.
Thank you. I feel like we should.
That's way too formal for a book club.
Yeah, true. We would all just tip
Yes,
up our
right.
wine. I feel like there's a lot of questions that are going to be online. That we have Facebook and YouTube there. So if you're listening and you have a question, ask up front, because there's quite a lineup, I understand. I know William has some questions, perhaps Diane, perhaps Dr. Simpson have some questions. So I'm just going to ask one.
Okay.
Because I think people don't want to hear my questions. The question I have is really about craft and creating characters, because your characters are always so vivid. How do you work up a character, and do you continue to add to the character, like putting icing on a cake afterwards, or is the character fully fleshed out before you sort of put them in the story?
That's how have I thought about that very much. I feel like, and maybe this is just hindsight and is completely false, but I feel like the characters are kind of who they are when I start writing. Like in Galore, there was the character of the widow who was kind of she is one of the characters that goes all the way through the book. Mm-hmm. And I had found a little anecdote probably in the archives about a woman who was accused of witchcraft. And as soon as I read that, I thought there's going to be a woman in this book who was accused of witchcraft, and I knew exactly who she was, what kind of person she was, and how she would respond in almost any situation. And I feel like with Ada and Everett, it was partly kind of the same thing. And partly it's a question of mechanics, right? For this story to reach the point it reaches, right, which is with Ada pregnant, mm-hmm. and neither one of them really knowing how it happened. That required particular kinds of people. Mm-hmm. So in that sense, it was just a practical question, like what kinds of people would find themselves in that situation? What kinds of people would not ask certain questions? What kinds of people would support each other in this particular way, but not in that way? So it is probably true that I'm constantly building and answering those questions as I go. But to a certain extent, after the fact, it feels like they were always who they were, and I knew that when I started. And in this book, and it's something I've never done before, but like Captain Truss, who I mentioned before, and also Bungs, the Scottish sailor who comes later, I found both of those characters in documents from the time. Cartwright's journal, which I read because it was written around the time I imagine this story took place. And then this sailor's memoirs of his time sailing all over the world, including some time in Newfoundland. Again, because it was from around the same time. And I knew that I couldn't write a book that was just two youngsters alone in a cove, that eventually some other people had to show up. And I thought, well, I could take bits and pieces from these characters and create a composite or something. But I thought, I want them to know what the 17th, early 18th century was, and to get a sense of the wider world and what people were like then. Well, why not? I'll just change their names and have Cartwright and this Scottish sailor show up. And so the people they are in the book are the people that I found in their own descriptions of themselves and how they are. So in that sense, it was just a grand larceny. I just sort of took these real people and stole whatever I thought might be useful for the book.
Borrowed.
Well, was that Eliot quote about immature artists borrow, mature artists steal.
Oh.
So, and I'm a senior now almost. So, if I'm not a mature artist yet, I'm never going to be. So I'm going to say steal.
Okay. William, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, sure. So building off that last notion, perhaps, sort of historical fiction, right? So in my own novel that I wrote, there was historical fictions about my grandfather coming here from China. But there's a lot of anachronisms in it. There's a lot of things that didn't really happen. I was just wondering, in your writing, what do we owe as creative writers to historical truths or historical facts?
Right. Well, I mean, this is something that I've thought a lot about because I've written so much stuff set in the past. And because I've seen a lot of things written about the place that I'm from that has either really disappointed or really pissed me off because of its inaccuracy, because it doesn't reflect the world that I feel like I grew up in. And part of me feels like all of those issues are side issues, and that a writer's only responsibility is to tell a good story. And if a book transports a reader and at the end they feel like that was a well-told story, then fine. That's really all a writer has to do, probably. But my own sense of it is that I owe something to the people and the culture that I'm writing about, and that I want to be as true to it as I possibly can. So that means spending a lot of time researching how people actually lived, how they got through their days, what they did. I remember when I was writing River Thieves, which was my first novel, I knew nothing about 18th century Newfoundland or about 18th century England. And it was so frustrating because I'd sit two people in a room because I needed them to have a conversation, but I didn't even know what the hell they were sitting on. Like, what did people use for chairs? How did they heat rooms? What did they? And in that book, I wrote the entire book with people putting wood in their stoves and boiling kettles on stoves, and then just before the book was published, I found out nobody had stoves. Like, it was all fireplaces. And so I had to go back through and haul out all the stoves and put fireplaces in, and it felt like renovation, right? For most people, that wouldn't matter. For most people, it would make no difference if I had stoves in there instead of. But for me as a writer, it would eat at me that I got that wrong, and that some people would know it, And some mistakes are inevitable. Like there's a scene in this book, one of my favorite scenes, where she finds one shoe after a shipwreck, and she's looking for the second shoe. And she finds the second shoe, and she's so delighted, and she's so thrilled. And then her brother has to break the news to her that it's for the same foot as the shoe she already has. And there was something so heartbreaking about that in my mind, And I read this scene at an event in Ottawa. And someone came up to me afterwards who's a specialist in 18th century costume. And there were no such thing as left and right shoes back then. It was just shoes, and you put them on your feet and wore them in. So for that person, it threw them out of the story. But only an 18th century costumer is going to be bothered by
Only
that.
issue historian. Yeah.
But if you're getting the people wrong, and if you're getting the particulars of how people, what it took to survive in a place like this, then I think you're doing a disservice to the place and to the people that you're supposedly writing about. So for me, like anachronisms, as long as they don't throw a reader out of the story, that's not such a big deal. And if you have to make things up, like as a novelist, even if you're writing a true story, like something that actually happened, as soon as you put yourself in the head of a character, you're making things up. And that's what fiction does, right? Fiction allows us to, it creates that illusion that we are living that experience with the people who actually experienced it. It's a complete illusion. It's totally fake, but when it's done well, it's absolutely convincing. And I think that's one of the real gifts that fiction has over things like straight history, you know.
Right. Yeah. Building on, can I keep?
Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Building on these notions of authenticity and historical fact, one of the real standout elements of The Innocents for me was the language. Sort of the use of these sort of colloquialisms or the sort of obscure regional words. How do you find all these words, and how do you decide which ones to use, which ones to not use?
Yeah, I mean, that's something that I've always had to think about writing books set in Newfoundland. And it's something that I've always struggled with because I've read a lot of books set in Newfoundland, usually by people not from here, who try to put Newfoundland dialect on the page exactly as they hear it. And to me, that's always a mistake. It just comes off as looking cartoonish, you know, dropping the H's and adding whatever. And Newfoundlanders are a lot of things, but in their speech and in their language, cartoonish is not one of them, unless they're trying to be. So for me, it's always been trying to figure out a way to give a sense of Newfoundlanders speaking in a way that's completely unique to this place, like different from anywhere else, but not done in a way that sounds clownish or cartoonish, or else is so so far outside the experience of readers outside of Newfoundland that they have no idea what's being said. So for me, the phrases, I mean, Newfoundlanders have always been so unbelievably creative in their use of language. So I'm always on the lookout for metaphors or parables or things that Newfoundlanders have created here that would give some sense of that. My Aunt Helen, I always think whenever I visit her, I should have a notebook, you know, because she's constantly throwing out things that when she goes are going to be lost, right? But part of it is just from growing up here and hearing people talk. The Dictionary of Newfoundland English is an invaluable resource, and I think I've reread it from cover to cover for each novel just for pleasure, right? Just because it is so unbelievably rich and creative. And for this book in particular, go on too long. I realized that it's set so far back that a lot of the characters in this book actually were not Newfoundlanders. They were Europeans,
right,
who hadn't become Newfoundlanders yet. So I found a dictionary of the vulgar tongue from 1795, I think it was, or 85, compiled in England. And especially when the sailors showed up. That was such an amazing resource to, like, I just went through and took my favorite insults that were listed in that dictionary and put them in the mouth of the sailors. But it's one of my favorite things to do because it is so central to Newfoundland culture, the language and the way that people speak and the way that they interact with each other when they speak.
The joy that's in the language.
Yeah, it just is, it's the place where Newfoundlanders are most themselves, it seems to me, is in how they speak and how they speak with one another. you know, just our way of whether we're angry with somebody or in love with somebody, there's something unique about the way that Newfoundlanders interact. And I've always been after trying to get that down on paper.
Great.
Great.
Dr. Timmons, did you have a question?
Yeah, I wondered if you grew up with a sister, because I'll mention I have a son and a daughter who grew up pretty well raising themselves because their older sister had unique learning needs, and she took a tremendous amount of parenting time, of my parenting time. And so these two little ones, from very young age, looked after themselves. He taught her colors, her counting. And when I read your book, and the relationship that they had was so similar in so many ways, with the love, the angst, the frustration, with watching my two grow up, really raising themselves in a very different, of course, environment, but it's more about the feeling, the interactions, the interconnection that they had. I wonder, you know, did you grow up with a sister? Did that help bring that kind of, what I thought was so true in a relationship, as I watched my two form a very similar relationship in a different place and a different time?
I was walking my dog at the park a couple of months ago, and a guy who I see at the park with his dog a lot, out of the blue, he said to me, "So, do you have a sister?" And I was like, no, I don't. He said, "Oh, I'm happy to hear that because I just finished your book." And but I don't have a sister. I have 3 brothers. And I think, I mean, clearly I was able to take some things from my relationship with my siblings. But again, I mean, with fiction, if I knew, I had a sense of what these two would have to be like in order to survive alone together and to end up in the circumstances that they end up in. And for me, from the outset, I decided that I wanted this book to be a love story. It could have, someone else, a different writer, could have taken that one paragraph about a brother and sister orphan who have a child and written a completely different story that I would not have been interested in reading, let alone writing. But for me, what I saw and what I wanted to give to those youngsters was 2 people who survived in this place on their own because of their love for the other person.
Yeah,
You know, like,
and they grew such strength. Individually, they were so strong, and together, so much stronger.
yeah, and that's, for both of them, I think, the reason they get up every day and do all of the shit that they have to do just to get through the day is because they want the other person to be well. And so for me, that was the heart of the relationship. And everything else that circles around it is just one thread, you know, like even the sexual relationship that grows up between them. It's kind of, for both of them, a secret that they keep from each other, right? It's not their relationship at all. Their relationship is something completely different and something, you know, they're kind of an Adam and Eve couple. And, but the fall that I see in the book is not the sexual relationship.
No.
The fall for me is much later in the book when the sailors leave. And up to that point in their lives, they had always thought, as long as I have this person with me, I'm complete. And after the sailors leave, it's the first time they look at one another and think, I might want more from the world than this person can give me. And for me, that was the loss of Eden, right? That was where they fall out of that experience they have of feeling like this other person completes me. And as long as that person is there, there's nothing else to think about. I was, sorry, very long-winded, and I'm not sure if I answered your question or not.
No, it's just amazing that connection, how you were able to build their relationship as 2 young people raising themselves and how they built such strength. And I saw that happen in my own.
Right.
Different, of course,
Yeah.
But that the interaction, the knowing what the other was thinking, I used to watch mine with awe because they literally raised themselves,
Right.
you know, when they were small.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Well, I'm
Good job.
really happy to hear that. Yeah, that
I had
part
so
resonated.
wished you had a sister that you'd say, yeah, that was my relationship with my sister. You disappointed me.
Right. That was inevitable as well.
Sure, I know there's people waiting. I'll try to be quick. So I'm kind of interested in writing as the work of the imagination. And I guess I'm wondering with this book, what did it demand of you that was difficult, the writing itself? Like what did it try to pull out, or where did you have to go in your imagination that was difficult or
Right.
unexpected?
This was a very, each of the novels I've written, my experience of writing it and how I feel about it after the fact has been completely different. And this book happened really quickly. Like I wrote most of the first draft in about 3.5 months, writing every day.
Okay.
I started on the 1st of March, and by the middle of June, I had most of the first draft. And that's not my experience of writing at all,
Right.
as a rule. So in some ways, the book felt a bit like a fever dream. You know, it felt like it just happened, and I just wanted it out of me. You know, I knew that there were 1,000 different ways for this book to go wrong, and I was pretty sure I was going to hit a few of them.
Find one.
So I just closed my eyes basically and jumped.
That's interesting. Yeah.
I think the big challenge for me as a writer was that so much of the book, as I said, is just two youngsters alone in a cove where every year is exactly the same. You know, I was sitting there thinking, oh God, here come the capelin again. Oh, and here's the codfish. And berry season, of course, just right. And I thought, you know, this is going to bore the hell out of people and me. So all I had, I thought, all I have to work with are whatever changes come over the youngsters each year, as subtle as they might be. And the only other thing I had was language. So for me, the voice of the novel was the most important thing from the beginning. And I really did go out of my way to go to the Dictionary of Newfoundland English and to try to find a voice that would carry the round of the seasons in a way that even though people knew they'd been through this before, it felt like something fresh in there.
Every time.
So that was my hope anyway.
Thanks.
That's great.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to go to some questions from online in a second. But first we have some recorded questions. So Bridgette Canning, whose second novel, Some People's Children, was released by Breakwater Books this past spring. She's an alum as well of MUN, and she has a question for Michael. Here's Bridgette.
Hi, my name is Bridgette Canning. I have a master's in creative writing from Memorial University's creative writing program. And I'm also a writer. I've published 2 novels. One is contemporary and the other takes place in the late 80s, and both involve significant research. So that is the subject that I want to question Michael Crummey about. Michael, I remember reading that you came across the idea for The Innocents from a clergyman's account that you found in the Newfoundland and Labrador archives. So my question is regarding the role that research plays in your writing practice. Do you make research something that you do regularly to find ideas, or do you come to the process of research with an idea already in mind? Thank you.
I'm not researching constantly. I am a very lazy person, and
I doubt that.
no, it's absolutely true. And so even I usually have an idea and then start researching, and I only research as much as I feel like I absolutely have to research. When I was writing River Thieves, one character, David Buchan, his backstory is that he was a young boy in the Royal Navy. And I knew nothing about the Royal Navy. So, and this will tell you how old I am, I went to the library and I got 10 books on the Royal Navy. And, but about 30 pages into the first book, I had enough detail to write Buchan's short little backstory. So that was the end of my research on the Royal Navy. Because for me, research, and it's different for different levels. Like, I do want to get things right, and I go out of my way to try and do that with research. But mostly, particularly in historical things, I'm just looking for a detail that sort of will give a reader a sense of a character or a sense of a place or a time. Once I find those things, I don't feel like I have to exhaustively research a particular issue or a particular...
It's a good way to not write research.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, with this book, I decided to take a shot at it, and I made up my mind I was going to spend a month researching, because again, I was writing about a time I knew something about because of River Thieves, mm-hmm. but I felt like I needed to get some material. And I was going to go to the archives and maybe do some interviews and stuff, but I started in my office, and I found Cartwright's journal, and I found the Scottish sailor's book, and there was one or two others. And as I was reading them, I thought, okay, I'm writing a book about two youngsters who never leave this tiny cove. So I'm going to treat the office like the cove. And whatever I can find in the office goes in the book, which is really just a way of making me feel better about not going to the archives or anything else. And I did cheat. The Dictionary of the Vulgar Tongue is actually online.
Okay.
But I thought, the internet is in my office. So it counts, technically. So, but yeah, usually the research comes after I have an idea. But I know we don't have Bridgette live here, but did she just say she wrote one contemporary book and one set in the late 80s?
Yep.
As if that was an
not
historical novel?
She did say.
That was a little dig she got in there.
Yes,
yeah.
thanks, Bridgette.
Do you guys have a question from the listeners or the viewers?
Yes, I have a question from a viewer. Alicia Morey comments that one part of the book she found particularly striking is when it is revealed that Everett found evidence of cannibalism on a ship caught in the ice. To me, this highlighted how humans may engage in taboo behavior when placed in extreme situations. Did Michael intend for this to serve as a parallel to Ada and Everett's incestuous relationship?
This is a good wine drinking question.
Yes. Yeah. Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the things I was most concerned about when I was writing the book was just, I did not want to be the person who wrote a book about incest. And I had a feeling that just the fact that that was part of the story was going to turn people off. So I wanted to find a way in the text to challenge people on what they're upset by. And also I've gotten this question a lot too, and I thought that I might, like, some people wonder, why are Ada and Everett so secretive and so ashamed of their sexual relationship when there's no one around to tell them that it's not, this is something you shouldn't be doing. And part of the reason the cannibalism is in there is because Ada's response to that, of course, is horror, right? Her response to that is, people couldn't really do that, could they? And she didn't need to be told that. Like, that was an instinctive response to that. And it's Bungs who says to her, well, it's easy to say that when you're sitting by a fire with a plate full of food, but you don't know what you would do if you found yourself in those circumstances. And in some ways, I wanted that to be a response to readers who would look at what Ada and Everett did and say, oh, that's an awful thing, and it's immoral. And I can't believe they're letting this guy publish this book. Because I think it is a circumstance where we don't know how we would react or how we would live our lives in those circumstances.
We're going to go to another recorded question. This one's from Matthew Hollett, who most recently won the CBC Poetry Prize for his beautiful work, Tickling the Scar, which he wrote in the early days of the pandemic along the Lachine Canal in Montreal, where he's currently based. And that prize comes with a $6,000 grant from the Canadian Council and the residency at Banff. So congratulations to Matthew Hollett, who I hope is watching, but this question was pre-recorded.
Hi everyone, my name is Matthew Hollett. I graduated from MUN in 2004 with a BFA in Visual Arts. I've also taught in the Visual Arts department at Grenfell. And over the past few years, I've taken a number of creative writing classes in St. John's, which have been a wonderful way to meet other writers and have really challenged me in different ways. So, as a writer with a visual arts background, I find that my favorite artists, especially photographers and filmmakers, really affect the way I see the world. And in turn, the way I see the world affects my writing. And so my question for Michael is, are there creative folks in other disciplines, maybe musicians or artists or filmmakers, who you would consider an influence and an inspiration on your writing? Thanks.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I always write with music on, and I don't know how that feeds into what I'm writing, but I feel like it does. And I usually will go on a jag with particular artists that seem to either fit my mood or what it is I'm writing at the time. And occasionally, I know that when I was writing River Thieves, I was listening to Dylan's Time Out of Mind album, almost on repeat. And there's a line in Trying to Get to Heaven that's, when you think that you've lost everything, you find out you can always lose a little more. And I just, again, stole it. Like I lifted it and I stuck it in the mouth of one of the characters. And film, I think some filmmakers have been, or particular films have been a big influence on me. But again, that's story and a way of telling stories. And so it's fairly direct. I don't know if I could point to, for example, visual artists that have really influenced how I write. And that's probably a personal failing on my part. But I don't know. I don't think that I could say that there is.
What music were you listening to when you were writing The Innocents? Do you remember?
I was listening to, there's these two guys out of Texas called the Stars of the Lid. Oh, yeah. And I just discovered them completely by accident. And they're talked about as, what are they? Sort of ambient.
Yes, ambient, that's right.
Ambient. But
that's right.
Their last two albums have moved away from the electronica thing and have become more orchestral. Mm-hmm. And it's like movie soundtrack music. Yeah. But so it can be background, but it's incredibly beautiful and unbelievably moving at times. Yeah. And there was something about it. There was a loneliness to it, but also, I don't know, you clearly know them.
I do, yeah.
Yeah, there's something, like a lot of ambient music is really dark and really pessimistic. Yeah. And there's something optimistic about the music.
Yeah, it's not full of despair.
Yeah. Or that the despair is tempered.
It's tempered, yeah. It's not just despair.
Yeah. And that to me seemed like the perfect music for the book.
Great.
Yeah.
Heidi, do you want to do a question from Facebook, or should we go to the next recorded question?
Yes, I have another question, but it is on YouTube. It's from Bruce Bork. Bruce asks, what happens to the Innocents after they move to the settlement? Would you consider writing a sequel?
I have gotten that question a lot for this book in particular. And I don't think I would be interested in writing a sequel. And I don't know what happens to them when they... I mean, there are a couple of hints thrown out at the end of the book in terms of, how they refer to each other once they get to Muckbeggar and that sort of thing. And I think when I started the book, I had intended to write past that moment where the child is born. But it was only in the 10 or 15 pages in the lead up to that birth that it really struck me that, no, that's the end of the book. Like, that's where the story started for me, like this notion that they have a child. And it just seemed like the perfect place to end it, you know, that's... And as with all of my books, I do feel like I'm not really interested in those characters beyond that. And so I don't think a sequel is in the cards.
Sorry to the viewer.
Yes,
there.
apologize.
Jim McEwen is another alum of the creative writing program, and he sent this question from his hometown of Dunrobin, Ontario.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jim McEwen. Thank you very much for having me. I graduated last year from the MUN English and Creative Writing MA program, and I just recently finished my first novel with help from the program. Hello, Michael. Thank you for taking my question. I'd like to ask you, what are some of your coping mechanisms for the frustrations of writing? Whether frustrations, like it could be your last few sentences are really not working out, or if it's just a bad day where you think, you know, what's the point? Who cares about this? Yes, what would some things you would do or tell yourself to sort of to readjust and to keep the faith? And I read some of your interviews, and I will try chips and Sapporos. So thank you very much, and Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays in Newfoundland. I miss you very much. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah, chips and beer are good. I mean, I think this comes back partly to the imposter syndrome thing, you know, that writing is, I think any artistic endeavor is incredibly difficult, because my sense of it is that we all feel like we're faking it. We all feel like we're getting away with something or not, right? That actually, no, I'm not getting away with this. And some days it's so hard to sit down in front of the page and write anything because you feel like a fraud. Or I remember after I finished the first draft of River Thieves, which was an awful experience writing that book. Like, that was, I had no idea what to expect when I had written short stories and poetry before, and had been writing for a long time. So I thought I was ready to take on a bigger project, and I was so not ready.
Oh, really?
And it was mostly because I just didn't know what it was and how things fit together, and I started in the middle of the story, and it was a mess. But that year of writing that first draft, I felt a little bit unstable, you know? I felt a little bit mental. And I went out, I was living in Kingston at the time, and I went out for a beer with Helen Humphreys, a writer from Kingston. And she had just finished writing her third or fourth or fifth book. And she said to me, you know, I figured it out. I figured out how to tell people what it's like to write a novel. She said, it's like having really, really bad PMS that goes on for months and months and months. And I said, you know, Helen, I've never had PMS, but I know exactly what you're talking about. And it's that emotional roller coaster of like
self-doubt.
Yeah, like of in the morning thinking this is brilliant, and by the afternoon thinking I'm just going to burn it. And I have another friend who said that she's just learned when she's going through she has horrible PMS, and she's just learned over time to ignore everything she thinks about herself and what she's doing. She said, I think it, and then I forget that I thought it. I just ignore it. And I think that that's the best coping strategy a writer could learn. And I've almost gotten there. Like, I have come to realize that part of writing a novel in particular is at some point thinking this is garbage and it's unfixable and I'm a trash human being. Why am I bothering? That's just part of the process. I don't know if it was for you guys.
Oh,
But yeah,
definitely.
it just, and the thing to do in that moment is to just
Keep writing.
turn it off. Yeah, just to, like, say it to yourself if you have to, and then move on. Because A, it's not true, and B, even if it is true, what else are you going to do with your life? I mean, for me, that was all I had. There was no plan B. So I just had to power through. And it has gotten easier. Like, over time, I find it much easier to get through those awful periods. My wife, Holly's writing a book now. And it's nonfiction. And it's about, it's mostly about marine plastics and how awful they are. But her way of writing about that is through writing about her life on the water. And I was so thrilled for her when she got the contract to write the book. But I said to her, you know, my only concern, the only thing that makes me dread this a little bit is watching you go through what I go through every time I write a book. And because it's not a lot of fun. And, you know, we're there now. We're there. I'm watching it, and it's like, oh, no. So bad. But she's powering through. She's plugging away.
Okay.
So
it happens to nonfiction writers as well.
Yeah, I mean, and it happens to people writing
Academic
theses.
writers,
Yes. There's something about the size of the project and the complexity of it that I think is unnatural. It's like a marathon. A marathon's a completely unnatural thing, and training for a marathon is a completely unnatural thing. And if you do that to yourself, there will be points in it when you think, this is the stupidest thing I've ever decided to do, and I'm just going to quit. You know? And so,
I've been there. I've ran marathons.
Yeah.
And I wrote that thesis. I've been there.
And I do think it is just, I often think that ignorance and stubbornness were my two best friends as a writer. You know, that I didn't know how bad it was going to get. And also, I just didn't want to quit. I mean, that's what got me through River Thieves. Was I thought, okay, I'll write it. It will suck. I'll never have to do it again. That was, I thought, but I'm not quitting. Right? It'll be a bad book, but it'll be a book.
Okay. Do we have a question from the audience?
We do have, before I read the next question, I will read a comment from Bridgette Canning, which says, Michael, I said I did research. I never said they were historical novels. I had to look up what kind of banana clips people wore in the 80s and everything.
Fair enough.
That's Bridgette. And then I have a question from Lenore. One of the wonders of this book is the inner lives of the children, the part of themselves that they don't share with each other. Michael, can you speak about some of that?
Yeah, thanks for that. That's, I'm just trying to find a way to approach that. I mean, I mentioned that I thought of Ada and Everett as kind of Adam and Eve characters. And because they're sort of dropped into this world that is complete, and they have a certain amount of knowledge. But in some ways, they're completely blind to the world that they're in. And in some ways, they're completely blind to their own natures. And in Genesis, of course, it's talked about explicitly as a form of blindness, right? It isn't until they eat from the tree of knowledge that they actually see that they're naked. Before that, they're blind to that fact. And I think that for both of these characters in the book, it is true, I think, that there are things about themselves that they do not see. And also that there are things about the other person that they are not privy to. And I think that both of those kinds of blindness are kind of the driving force for everything that happens in the book. It's their sort of dancing around each other's. It's kind of their awareness of what they don't know about the other person that is I think in some ways it's kind of the magic of all human relationships, like that. Holly and I have been married for 15 or 16 years now, and she is still like a stranger to me in some ways, and that's inevitable. And it's also, there's something really magical about that. It's easy to, I think it's easy to fall in a long relationship or with siblings or with your parents. It's easy to fall into the illusion that you know that person completely and that you're almost one and the same person. And the truth is, of course, that you're not. And I think that I wanted that to come through in the book, that although they start out with the sense that there is, I think the saying was as close as the rind on a tree is, to one another. The whole process of the book is them realizing how much they don't know about each other and what strangers they are to each other, and how that has no impact on how much they love each other and how much they live for one another. Sorry, that was kind of long and winding. I haven't ever been asked that before, and it's a really good question, but I'll come up with a great answer for it at 3 o'clock this morning.
So we have one final taped question from alumna Allison Graves. So we're going to go to Allison next.
Hi, everyone. My name is Allison Graves, and I graduated from the English MA program at Memorial in 2017 and have been teaching in the English department ever since. For my master's thesis, I wrote a collection of short stories under Lisa's supervision that negotiated ideas around places and non-places. I'm applying now to go back to school, and I've been thinking a lot about mediums and how best to tell my stories. I also think our current isolated reality has caused me to think about experimenting with new modes of telling stories. So my question for Michael is, do you ever consider other mediums to tell your stories? I feel like there's more of a hunger now than ever for podcasts, television, and movies. Does any other mode appeal to you or seem like an effective way for you to storytell? Thanks so much.
That's, again, a really good question. And unfortunately, I think I have to fall back on something I brought up earlier, which is that I'm an incredibly lazy person. And I remember I started out as a poet.
I'm going to challenge you on that.
No, it's, well,
you have worked in film. You
away.
write for film with the NFB. You've done some beautiful work.
Yes, I mean, that was the paycheck. And I mean, it is true that I love doing that because it was so unlike anything else that I was doing, and yet so similar. You know, it was, but that is not I didn't go to the NFB and say, listen, I have a great idea for a film, right? I don't sit around thinking,
what kind of
now that I've written a novel, how else can I go about this? What other ways can I, and it's partly, like I started out writing poetry, and that was all I wanted to do for a long time. And it took years to come to a place where I felt like I had anything like a voice that was my own. And I did not write fiction for a long time because I just didn't want to go through that same process with fiction. I was too lazy to go through that again.
Of finding your way.
Yeah, like that sort of in the
idiot.
ditch. Like in the ditch, just digging day after day, and feeling like you're not getting anywhere. Mm-hmm. So I wish I was more, I really admire people like Lisa Moore, who has all kinds of ways to be creative in the world. Michael Winter's the same. Being creative is how he approaches everything he does. That's what he is in the world. And I have this one place.
But
where
Michael,
I am creative.
Can't you see The Innocents as a movie? Because I could. I can see it as a very powerful movie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that people have said that my writing is cinematic.
Yeah.
And I think I visualize when I'm writing. And I know I'm reading a good book when I forget that I'm reading.
Oh,
I
yeah.
feel like I'm in the world that's being described. And I so desperately want that to be people's experience.
That was mine with The Innocents. I read it in one sitting and nobody came near me. Not even the dogs.
Right.
And
I mean, that is so gratifying. Like, to me, that feels like, okay, I must have done something right. And I think it could be a movie, but I'm not going to make it. Right? Like, if someone wanted to make a movie of the book, I'd be great. I'll take a check, and you make the movie you want to make. Because it's partly because I feel like I'm done with the characters, but also that is such a different world and a different way of approaching storytelling that I think I've got my little.
Yeah, you're quite good at it.
This is doing okay at the moment.
Will we take another question from the audience? Probably the last one, hey?
Yeah, I think we have time maybe for 2 more.
2 more, okay.
Heidi has one. This one from Carol Ann Griffins. One of the book club discussions revolved around thoughts on the title of the book, which is perfect for the story. When did you decide that this was the title? Was it near the start of the process, before the characters were fully developed, or did it emerge as the right choice as the novel and characters evolved?
Titles are always an interesting question with me because they're almost always the last thing. And not because I don't have titles that I think are great. It's because I have titles that other people think suck and refuse to use. So this book had a bunch of other titles as I was writing it. And my editor, Martha, from Toronto, was down here for a visit just after she had finished reading the first draft. And she really didn't think the titles were working. And we talked about a bunch of things. And I was saying, there's a lot of blindness in the book. And I was just becoming aware of that. And I wanted to try something with blindness. And so I went home from that talk and went to the dictionary of Newfoundland English, and I looked it up under B. And under B, there was blinder. And the blinder is the person in hide and seek who covers their eyes while other people hide. And I thought, it was so perfect that I thought this can't be real. So for a long time, this book was called The Blinder. And then, which I thought was great. And of course, now I think that it was a little too esoteric. But one of those really happy things that happen occasionally in a writer's life, this book got sold in the States. And the person who bought it there was in touch with me to say she really loved the book and stuff, but she wasn't sure that the title really was the title. So of course I wrote her back and said, well, I'm an artist and this is the title I've decided on, so I'll send you back the money, and thanks for your interest. What I said was, you call it whatever you want. The blinder's out. But I really was stuck. And I was talking to Holly about it. And she said, I've been thinking about the notion of innocence a lot. And as soon as she said it, I thought, well, what about just the innocence? And that was it. That was kind of, everybody said, yeah, no, that'll. And now, of course, River Thieves was the same. River Thieves was like they said, we have to start talking about this in public, so we need a title. And it was the last minute thing, and as soon as that title was put on the book, it was like, that's the book, that's the title. Doesn't always work. The Wreckage was the same thing, terrible title, terrible. And it just doesn't really work with the book, and it's one of the things I really regret. I think that book just doesn't work, partly because the title doesn't work. Anyway, there's a long answer to that short question.
Wow.
My mic was not, sorry. We have one last question from Martin Poole, who says, hello everyone. Having recently completed a thesis on the nature of artistic creativity, I find discussions on the craft of writing quite interesting, especially how one's writing may in part reflect one's environment and experience. Since we're discussing the changing landscape of literature in Newfoundland, and that we are currently within the COVID-19 epoch, do you have any thoughts on how COVID-19 may change the course of literature in Newfoundland?
William, you want to take that one?
Well, ironically, the ending of my book ends with the pandemic. That's a bit of a spoiler. I probably shouldn't say that.
Right.
But yeah, I don't know. how the pandemic will affect all arts and all culture going forward, right? I can't imagine such a world-changing event, and we're not clear of it yet, so who knows, right?
I mean, I think the effects are even retrospective. Like, I think a lot of people have read The Innocents as a kind of pandemic book because it's about two people who are thrown back on their own resources, alone in the world, cut off from everything outside them. I mean, that was completely outside of anything I considered when I was writing it, but the pandemic is the lens through which we're seeing everything now, right? So it'll be interesting to see. I mean, there are going to be just a torrent of pandemic memoirs and pandemic films, and but in terms of Newfoundland specifically, it does feel like Newfoundland's experience of the pandemic has been qualitatively different than a lot of other places, because we're an island, because we managed to keep it at bay to a large extent. So the pandemic was kind of like this thing that was out there that we wanted to keep out there. And so there's probably going to be things around that play
Because
into
we followed rules, right? You know, we're not seeing those anti-mask demonstrations, hundreds walking the streets.
Yeah.
There are many reasons.
And we're a more communal place.
Yeah.
We care for each other. you know.
Sure. I mean, I think that this is probably getting too much into politics, but like in the States, it's all about individual freedom and liberty, and you can't force me to wear this mask, even though I have to wear a seatbelt when I get in a car. I don't know what the difference is. Whereas here, like, it's like, if I wear this mask, other people will be safer.
Yeah.
Right? And that's the motivation here, it feels like. So.
Interesting.
So that's it from the audience. Thank you, everyone, for your amazing questions. Thank you, Michael, for your thoughtfulness.
Thanks for having me and for
your
the invite.
wisdom. There was lots
And
of
it was
wisdom there.
deep.
Yeah, it did.
It
go
was
deep.
deep, Michael. You told me that there would be some blabbering. There wasn't any blabbering.
That was all blather. All blather all the time.
Dr. Simpson's going to close out our first book club now.
Yeah, I'll just echo the
Is this your
thanks.
very first book club experience?
No,
I'm
actually,
a book
no.
club virgin.
Novice, okay. So how was it?
Fabulous.
1 to 10, what was it?
Oh, 25.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, this was
Even without snacks.
Yeah, well, I did mind that, but it was a great experience.
Yes.
It literally is
Yes.
my first time sitting around with a group of people. That's not an academic book, right? That's not in a university classroom. That's truly a book that I read to enjoy. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, I want to thank all of you. It was just really nice. I think we've all been in COVID. We haven't had the chances to do this. Sure. And I don't know any of you well, but it was great and really generous. I just found your comments generous and honest and engaging, and you showed even vulnerable about how you worked with the story. So yeah, thank you. And thanks to everyone. Thanks to the audience for the questions. Thanks to folks at the Ever Innovation Exchange and up at Signal Hill, all of Janet and Heidi and Catherine and Lynn and everyone who organized this and got us all together. It was a great start, I think. Thanks to the audience members, both watching live, and I feel like we could all come back in another month and do it again. It's great. So I can announce that the next book and author is One for the Rock by Kevin Major, so that's what we can look forward to for the next conversation. And to join and kind of, I don't think the date's been set for the next book meeting, but you can just watch social media, and again, that website is www.pbc.guru.mun. So thanks again to everyone here and everyone watching and attending. It's a great evening.
Thanks.
All right.
Well done, Michael.
Thank you.
Well done, Angie. Good job. Well done.